Hi, I'm Molly Potter, talking about emotions again. In this video, I give you some ideas about how to become more emotionally intelligent. Although emotional intelligence is rarely in mainstream focus, I promise you there are huge benefits once you start to master it. So I'm going to start by asking,
how do you manage your emotions? Are you someone who very quickly and obviously becomes emotional and in doing so moves straight to impulsive reactions that you feel you have little control over and that you nearly always repeat every time the same emotion is triggered? Or are you someone who rarely acknowledges or displays their emotions, pretend you don't have them, and therefore also have no control over how they might surface, such as through strange behaviours like an intense need to control or angry outbursts, seemingly unrelated to what originally triggered your emotion? Or are you someone who notices emotions as they arise, can link the emotion to what triggered it, can reflect upon the thoughts linked to emotions and assess whether they are distorted, exaggerated in the heat of the moment, or tainted by your opinion of yourself or others? Can wonder what might be going on for anyone else involved in any situation where emotion has been triggered? And can decide calmly and consciously what might be the best response to the emotion being triggered, even if that is just to manage the emotion or, as is often the case, take some action that will help resolve the issue that triggered the emotion in the first place. If you're this, you probably don't need to watch this video.
in my past, I was definitely someone who seemed to have very little control over my impulsive responses to emotions. I mostly repeated my father's approach as that was the lesson I learnt the loudest in my childhood. He would explode whenever he felt threatened, vulnerable, humiliated, or indeed angry, because that's the only way he knew how to process emotions. Eventually, I worked out that I had to develop a different way of managing my emotions, because quite often that approach made situations worse, and afterwards I'd end up feeling completely foolish. So what did I learn?
The first thing I'm going to say is simply start paying attention to your emotions. Few people even think to do this. It's quite counterculture, and most people seem to need quite a bit of convincing to believe their emotions are even worth considering. That's because we live in a world that would happily pretend emotions didn't exist. They are mostly seen as illogical and inconvenient, especially in the world of work. We are encouraged to mostly trust our thinking when we approach situations, as if its tight logic can always be relied upon. We can convince ourselves that thinking functions without being distorted, blinkered, or biased, and that it remains unaffected by our emotions. But emotions are a huge part of being human, and ignoring them doesn't mean that they go away. It just means that when they do visit, they can be complete strangers to us. When we don't really know our emotions, chances are we respond to them the same way as we've always done, without challenge, the way we probably learnt as a child. When emotions are mostly unconscious to us, we have little chance of managing them effectively, because we're either not or only very partially aware of them arriving and the impact that they have. Examples of people who are unaware of their emotions include the person who has a bad day at work and then comes home and takes it out on their kids. That person does not make the link between the emotion the bad day triggered and the resulting behaviour. Or the person who becomes defensive and insults others because they feel vulnerable. Or the person who, because they were made to feel vulnerable, goes and bullies someone else to feel more in control again. Lack of awareness of these automatic responses means our emotions can cause havoc. So, as I said, and it is important, the first thing to do to improve emotional intelligence is to start to tune into your emotions so that you become more and more conscious about what is going on for you emotionally. Things you can do to help you pay more attention to emotions include exploring emotion words. How many words do you use to describe how you feel? There are so many words, and increasing your emotion vocabulary and ways of describing how you feel can improve your emotional intelligence in itself. Pondering words like frustrated or overwhelmed can help you really think about what each emotion is like and what might trigger them in you. You could also take time at the end of each day to reflect upon what you might have felt that day and what might have triggered it. Some people find keeping an emotion diary helpful. Another thing you can do is consciously start looking out for situations where you have a strong reaction of any kind and ask yourself, what are you feeling? You could start asking people, how are you feeling more? And search for a more authentic answer than, I'm fine. Also take more time to wonder what other people might be feeling in different situations. Some people do this more naturally than others, but sometimes even putting yourself in other people's shoes can help you move away from your usual emotional reactions.
What you're ultimately aiming to do is to start to notice your emotions as they arise in the moment. By doing this, we gain more control over our responses as we can make them so much more conscious. If you think about it, the moment that an emotion arises is the make or break moment, the point at which we can start to put in more conscious management of our emotions and our responses.
When we have poor emotional intelligence, the process of experiencing emotion often goes like this. There's a trigger, in other words, something happens that you react to. There's an automatic interpretation, in other words, you read the situation in a particular way. An emotion arises and you have an automatic impulsive response. This usually results in a situation that has not been managed well, and there's often a poor outcome, either at that point in time or further down the line. Let me explain this further by giving an example. If you had the trigger of somebody not listening to you, your interpretation of that person not listening to you will be unique to you. It might be slightly different at different times depending on things like how you already feel about the person who didn't listen to you, how tired you are, what else is going on for you, and so on, all of which you might not be conscious of. But your interpretation will also tap into how you feel about yourself and your beliefs about yourself, all of which could also be completely unconscious. Different people can have quite different interpretations of exactly the same event. For example, somebody not listening might trigger some people to automatically think things like, nobody listens to me, I am unimportant, or I have lost control. The emotion a person feels will, of course, be influenced by the interpretation they automatically had about the situation, and the feelings they might end up with could be feelings like shame, anger, feeling vulnerable, or humiliated. This can quickly move to an automatic response, which again will depend on the individual, but their response could be an aggressive outburst, withdrawal and inaction, which will probably mean the person ruminates about what has happened and struggles to move on. Their response could be to go away and moan, or to go and try and exert control somewhere else. The person in a chain of reactions like this could be so unaware that this is what they do, that they don't even notice that they repeat it over and over again.
So how do you become aware of emotions as they arise in the moment if you've never done it? Well, it takes dedicated time and practice, but I promise you it's worth it, because I think it's really the start of most people becoming truly emotionally intelligent.
There are different ways you can become more aware of emotions generally, as I have described, but being able to see your emotions arrive as they arrive can help you become extremely emotionally intelligent. Most of the methods that help you become more aware of your emotions as they arise are about making you have greater awareness of the moment that you're in right now, rather than being perpetually distracted by thoughts about the future or ruminating over what's already happened. One method to help you become more aware of emotions as they arise is to start doing emotion check-ins by simply and regularly asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? Take some time to look inwards and see if you're genuinely calm, if there is anything agitating you, if there's something you're feeling positive about, or if there's a strong emotion that's visiting, work out what it is. Another method is to engage in mindfulness and meditation practices. I see mindfulness and meditation as a long-term investment that can bring you more frequently into the moment and can benefit your well-being significantly. They usually take time and practice, but they will ultimately make you less reactive and more able to be a detached observer of your thoughts, feelings and potential responses, so that you gain more control over what you end up doing or not doing.
I personally got better at noticing my emotions arise in the moment as they arose when I started practicing EFT, or Emotional Freedom Technique. Now, EFT is the tapping away of strong emotions, and it may well be far too woo-woo for some people. But whether EFT works or not was not the main thing I took away from practicing it. Because EFT is about tapping away strong emotional reactions, it started to make me look inwards more, as I became really vigilant for any kind of need to tap. This inadvertently made me far more aware of my emotional state in any moment, which I think is so key to becoming emotionally intelligent.
So anything that brings you more into the moment will bring you greater self-awareness as you become a more detached observer of yourself. A detached observer can see their emotions, thinking responses and reactions, and start to challenge them and find better, less automatic ways of responding. A detached observer is more outside the situation, not in the midst of it, and therefore has more flexibility in how they respond.
So with practice, you can eventually get really good at noticing emotions arise as they arise. So what do you do then?
The next part is to be really curious about each emotion and the unique relationship you have with it. This is where you can really start to learn even more about yourself, your conditioning, your self-beliefs, and why you behave in the ways that you do. Emotional intelligence really is a substantial key to self-awareness. When being curious about your emotional response, you could ask yourself questions like, what triggered this emotion for me? Does this kind of situation always trigger this emotion for me? What am I thinking? Have I made assumptions? Did what happened touch on something I feel sensitive about? Probably because it's something you were made to feel sensitive about at some previous point in your life. Or did the situation trigger some underlying belief I have about myself? Might others have seen this situation quite differently? Or am I doing any unhelpful and unnecessary thinking? Often any unhelpful thinking linked to an emotional reaction uses absolutist language like, nobody listens to me, nothing good ever happens to me, I must always be in control, everybody always takes advantage of me, I never cope well in situations like this. When we use words like always, never, nobody and nothing, it usually indicates something we believe about ourselves deep down. It's often a message our childhood left us with, and that's why it can be so powerful, automatic and hard to challenge. But it's always a load of nonsense, because nobody will always be something, never be something, and have everybody or nobody always reacting to them or thinking about them in the same way. That is often a catastrophizing assumption that comes from a self-belief based in low self-worth and believing that we are not good enough. And what's more, these thoughts are far more likely to be turned up in volume when we are in the grips of an unenjoyable emotion.
If you find there is unhelpful thinking, it's time to challenge it. There's nearly always plenty of evidence that will prove that your thinking is not correct.
Nobody listens to me? Really? I bet most of the people you know do listen to you. Nothing good ever happens to me? It should be easy to think of something good that's happened to you. I always need to be in control. Do you really? What's your fear of not being in control? Everybody always takes advantage of me. Your emotion might make you feel like that now, but chances are, most of the time, the majority of people don't. I never cope well in situations like this. I bet you can think of plenty of times when you did cope well. Quite often, an emotion, if you're not aware of it, can trigger a cascade of self-doubting or even self-loathing thoughts, especially if you have low self-esteem, and also if you were taught that it was wrong to express negative emotions like anger or jealousy. And if your emotion was triggered because of what someone else did or said, chances are they really were either not thinking, they were grumpy and not managing themselves very well, they probably didn't mean it, and they would probably be devastated to learn they've had such a negative impact on another person. The thoughts that can go hand in hand with unenjoyable emotions can often be distorted if we don't learn to challenge them.
Challenging any automatic thinking you do when an emotion has been triggered can help you realise that the strength of your emotional response sometimes comes as much from your unhelpful thinking as it does what actually happened. Another way of challenging your thinking is to reframe it.
One example of reframing is to consider what might be going on for anyone else involved in the situation. So, for example, if you felt someone treated you unkindly or unfairly, you could wonder, under what circumstances might I behave like they just did? This can help remind you that none of us are perfect, that we all make mistakes, and that it's good to give the same forgiveness to others as we would like to be given if we had just behaved like they did. It can also help us take others' comments or reactions less personally. It might feel like it's all about us, but it rarely is. When you ask, under what circumstances might I behave like that, you might come up with answers like, if I was distracted by something and not thinking like I normally do, if I was really stressed, if I did not feel well, or if there was something I was really struggling with. This can help you be more forgiving of other people's behaviour and mean you can let go of the wound it caused more easily.
Another way of reframing is to use a shift in perspective to change the way you think about a situation.
To do this, you could think about a time when this will all be behind you and no longer a problem. Remember a time when you were in the same position and recall what you did and how you coped then. Remind yourself that most things do turn out well. Notice your head when it ruminates, in other words, goes round and round with unhelpful thoughts of what went or could go wrong. Also notice when you catastrophise, which is assuming that everything that could go wrong will go wrong, and tell it to stop. Focus on this moment and remind yourself that right now you are absolutely fine. Try and become more comfortable with uncertainty, and remember none of us can control everything. And also, picture everything turning out okay. This can sometimes be surprisingly helpful.
Obviously, not all situations require you to reframe or to manage your thoughts and emotions. Sometimes it's really clear that an emotion has been triggered because there's a need to sort something or problem solve or prevent something that's happened from happening again.
Once you have filtered out any distortions or irrational absolutisms in your thinking, this is where having emotions is really useful, because they are telling you something needs sorting. You need to work out exactly what the problem is and what you can do to address it. It might be, for example, that anger and indignation are telling you someone has overstepped the mark and you need to protect a boundary, or someone has overlooked or dismissed your needs. It might be that feeling confused and agitated means someone has made an unhelpful assumption about you that has put you in a difficult position. It could be that feeling overwhelmed and powerless means someone is bullying you. Perhaps feeling dazed and a bit helpless means there is something you need help with. It could be that feeling procrastinatory and uneasy means there's a difficult, unenjoyable or time-consuming situation that needs sorting. Feeling anxious and nervous could mean you need to get on and do something that you don't think you will cope with well. It might be that feeling daunted and indecisive means you have a decision to make and you're really unsure about it. Or simply that an emotion you're experiencing has gone on for a long while, is becoming very tricky to manage, and you need some practical guidance about how to manage it so it causes you less suffering. Situations like these are when you actually need to do something and your emotions were an indicator, or sometimes an alarm, telling you this. Of course, I will just add here, as an aside, that some emotions, like fear or surprise, are about making you respond really quickly to keep you safe. These sorts of emotions often override thinking. Say, for example, when a car rushes past you, fear makes you respond quickly to ensure your safety. But even fear can misfire, and we can become scared of things that are not actually going to harm us. So I will also add that thinking about all emotions can help us work out what's useful and what's not. So emotional intelligence is powerful stuff. It not only gives you self-awareness, it alters your interactions with others beneficially, it enhances your ability to cope, it gives you a healthier perspective in tricky situations, and it makes life so much more interesting as you move more flexibly and acceptingly within it.
So that's my whistle-stop tour of how to become more emotionally intelligent. I could say so many more things about things like coping strategies, being assertive, looking at specific emotions and helping your child to become more emotionally literate. But if you want to learn more, there's plenty to be found over at my blog on www.mollypotter.com, or of course you can find more on this YouTube channel.